Candilejas, teatro y espectáculo con César Vidal.
We're back in this Friday night for the most loved moment in this program. You know that, of course, we are finishing our program from Monday to Thursday with very good collaborations of professionals talking about economics, about literature, about psychology. But the Friday night is very, very special to me. There's one reason, and it's the persons we have Friday night are very, very special people. Sometimes they are very special people, well known over all the world, because he was a director who got an Oscar from Hollywood because he was a great director. Sometimes he's a ballerina well known over all the world. Sometimes there are not people known over all the world. They are known in any country, and we are decide to make this person known in other parts of the world. And sometimes even we have persons that are known only in this or that region of the world. The person that we have today, our guest, is a very exceptional person. I must tell you that I had been totally seduced by several of her books during the last weeks. I have read only 3 books. I know that she has written more books than these 3 books, but these are very incredible books with an information that is, well, the information worthy of being part of the script of a Hollywood movie or a series in Netflix. But anyway, they are incredible books. And we're going to talk about some of the issues that she tells in these books, probably with additional information, but I can tell you with a total trust, with a total confidence that she's a very special person and you're going to enjoy this interview. I'm talking about Kirby Sommers. Kirby, you are very welcome to La Voz of César Vidal, and it's an honor to have you with us.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I'm so excited when you invited me. I thought, wow. And then I looked you up and see how you have interviewed so many incredible people. So I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, first questions, and we are going to begin from the beginning. You have written several books related to Jeffrey Epstein, and I must ask you, well, who was really Epstein? He was a friend of politicians. He was a man giving sex to important people. He was a spy. Who was really Epstein?
Well, I wrote a book called Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy. However, Epstein was really a hired help, if you will. He is sort of the only person that we, the public, have been able to see in this role. He was an intelligence operative selected to run a trafficking ring, a honeypot ring, but these have existed before Epstein. They exist to present day, and they are connected to intelligence. So he cannot really be called, let's say, a friend of the politicians that surrounded him, or just someone who entrapped people. He worked on behalf of someone else. Um, what's curious is that I have become during the years friendly with some of his victims, and when they talk about Epstein, just like with a lot of psychopaths, they say he was very friendly, he was very charismatic, especially when compared to Ghislaine, who was really very hateful toward them.
Why was important Epstein? Why was important his death? We're going to talk about the death within some minutes, but before I should like to know about this. Why was so important?
Well, blackmail is a very integral part of any government. And in Epstein's case, um, it's my understanding, having done more research, that he was not only part of, let's say, most people just go to Mossad. Initially, I too believed it was Mossad until I continued to take away the layers, really study this and study the connections, which led me to the CIA. And then, of course, it led me to MI6. The importance of Epstein to, let's say, the intelligence community is it provided them, I'm sure you've heard of, like, the intelligence community. When they're caught, they lie. They have something called plausible deniability. Hiring somebody like Epstein through intermediaries, right? So, like Leslie Wexner of The Limited, who also owned Victoria's Secret, was, I believe, a long arm, a cutout for the CIA and Mossad, who work collaboratively, as was Leon Black, the son of Eli Black, was also a cutout. So the importance of him was to gather up information so that, there's such a thing called the shadow government, right? So that that world can run, the one that we, the public, cannot see effectively.
So that he was not only a sex seller. He was very much more important than selling or giving or affording sex. He was very important because he can gather material related to intelligence and gather material to make blackmail.
Precisely. And I wish that mainstream media would even word their articles that they continue to write about him in the way that you just phrased that, because that's exactly what he was. He was a provider of information. The politicians, and not just of the United States, as you know, it was an international ring connected to many others, um, dictated how that country is run, right? Who sits in a position of power, dictated many things, the laws that were brought about, many different things.
Let's talk about a person very close to Epstein. Thanks God she's alive. That is Ghislaine Maxwell. Who was really Ghislaine? And by the way, I must tell you that I have read your biography of her, and it's really a thriller. You cannot believe this. If this would be only a novel, I have thought, well, the writer has a lot of imagination, but this is not a novel. This is a biography, and you begin to read the biography, and you cannot let the book, because it's a very very interesting book. It's well, it's a real thriller. It's like read a novel of spies with death, with sex, with information. Who is really Ghislaine Maxwell?
Ghislaine is I think she represents many families that are in the intelligence community. So we know that her father, Robert Maxwell, was a spy for the state of Israel at the time of his death. He began his career as a spy for the UK. However, he was the sort of, let's call, spy that was more interested in financial motivation and power, rather than, let's say, guided because he thought something was good or bad. Ghislaine, that was her father. He was murdered, although they claim it was suicide. But you also have to worry about. She never believed it was suicide, by the way, and she made that very clear. She is his daughter. He had amassed during his long career as a spy, which began really when he was still a young man in the army. She was his favorite daughter. They had 9 children. Robert Maxwell and his wife Betty. Ghislaine was the youngest of the 9. She was the most pampered. She was the most attractive of the female children. She continued what appears to be a multi generational intelligence family. Once her father died in November of 1991, she then became entangled with Jeffrey Epstein. She provided him, let's call it a front, right? To some people, they presented themselves as husband and wife, especially to the victims' families. If you see a woman, then how bad can it be to send your child to their home, right? Or on vacation with them? So she gave Epstein the patina of being a credible, reliable man, as opposed to, let's say, a pedophile that he was, and or a sex trafficker. She also provided him with her own contacts, which were obtained from her very powerful father, who had, what, 4 or 5 decades of spying under his belt. She was very important to him.
Listening to you, it seems that Ghislaine Maxwell was more important than Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, Epstein had his own connections, and he had been in the, let's call it, the spying industry uh, much earlier than mainstream has only made a minor reference to Epstein's spying activities, and that's through Alexander Acosta, who was the district attorney for the state of Florida in 2005, 2006, 2007, before Epstein um, was given a very lenient sentence. If you remember the very first time in Palm Beach, when it was sort of
Yeah.
negotiated behind, I mean, it was a crazy thing, in order not to get the federal government involved. They reduced it down to state charges because the government, there you go, the federal government wanted to remain um, with hands clean, so they pushed it down to the state level. However, Epstein's intelligence background goes back, I believe, to the 1970s, because in the 1970s, and Ghislaine is only a child, right? She was born in 1961. In the 1970s, she's 10 years old when Epstein is already hanging around with gun dealers, gun smugglers, drug smugglers, spies from, Sir James Goldsmith, for example. So he was a much more experienced spy than, let's say, Glenn.
I think one of the things that impressed me more in your books, in your biography of Ghislaine Maxwell, is the way she pick up, uh, young girls to give these girls to Jeffrey Epstein, and the question is, what is a sex slave within an operation like Epstein's?
Well, there are many operations, but I'm going to specifically, let's talk about Virginia Giuffre. When the time she was, I believe, 15, 16 years old, she was working at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach when Ghislaine Maxwell found her. Her role as a procurer is very important because, children and even women and most men um, never feel that women are that much of a threat, right? And Ghislaine was very properly educated. She had the best British accent. She wore impeccable clothing. So she walks in and she can speak to this young teenager who is completely inexperienced, who has no money, who comes from a broken home. And she sees her reading a book, and she says, "Hey, I can help you. I can introduce you to my friend. He is looking for a masseuse. Maybe we can travel the world." I mean, when you're a 15, 16-year-old child, you do not know that this sounds very strange. And so she was able to procure somebody like Virginia Roberts at the time. She was not married, obviously. And then slowly, but even that night, she was sexually assaulted. Once someone is sexually assaulted and you're that young, and she then was given money, the money makes a potential sex slave feel, I've done something wrong, therefore it must have been my fault because you're young, you don't know. And so Virginia became, quote, a sex slave. And that made it possible for Epstein and Ghislaine to say, well, what you did with Epstein, because Ghislaine trained her sexually. She just trained her to do all of the things you're supposed to do. But they also trained her in a different way, to listen, kind of like Mata Hari, right? So you have a spy, a female spy, who's going to have intimate relations with very powerful men like Prince Andrew. We all know about Prince Andrew. What did Epstein want after she was with Prince Andrew? He wanted all the information. Anything he said, his sexual picadillos, because he always told her information is power. And so through his many, many sex slaves, he was able to, pull in that information, which enabled him to keep doing what he did, as well as Galen.
And well, really, we can know what did know Ghislaine Maxwell.
I think that Ghislaine, basically commencing from the time that she began working with Epstein, which would have been 1992, to the time of her incarceration, she knew basically the names of everyone. We only know, even though there's been a long list that we've learned, and really only through Virginia. Imagine there are thousands of girls, right?
Yeah.
But we've only heard about one. And from her, we have maybe 30 names of very powerful men. Um, so somebody like Ghislaine would know the names of all the men, right? She would know everyone who was compromised. I mean, she would know things like Donald Trump, Bill Clinton. And, remember in the 2016 presidential race, we had Hillary Clinton running against Donald Trump, and not one of them brought up Epstein as arsenal for the other one. It goes to show that it crosses party lines. Um, it just crosses international borders, frankly, because you have Prince Andrew as an example, and there are many others from other countries that were associated with them.
I see. Well, I was remembering when you was talking a bordel in Germany during World War II named Salon Kitty. And in Salon Kitty, there were prostitutes that get information from different diplomats and businessmen in Germany. And I was thinking that maybe Ghislaine Maxwell had a kind of Walmart of salon kitties. I mean, well, a lot of thousands of girls getting information. I don't know how many women were working in Salon Kitty, probably only 20, 30 women at most. But this was a kind of a real change of salon kitties having informations from anyone. Well, why did Ghislaine Maxwell not give a list of customers? Because everyone was in the list of customers.
Well, see, I think that most people believe that we truly have a regular, uh, good judicial system. But the truth is that just like the politicians are compromised, so too are the judges. And also, when someone provides names, and by the way, the prosecution never offered her a plea deal, which raises a red flag, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you would think that yeah, you would think she's arrested, she's going to give up names, there's going to be a plea deal. They never even asked her for it. And Ghislaine, not only would she not do this because clearly she doesn't want to die. So, for example, before Epstein was made dead, 2 days before, he made an announcement, which is now, you cannot even find it in the media, it's been scrubbed, that he was going to name the men who paid, because there was a separation between men who he got money from and men that he just gave the girls to. 2 days later, he was dead. She also is worried about her life. And she's not in the low level. So who can she give up? Epstein's already dead. It's my belief that the only reason Ghislaine even went to, and really the prosecution and the trial was very lightweight. There were witnesses on the stand that could have implicated other men, high level men, like Donald Trump, frankly. But the men, their names and who they were given to as, let's say, gifts, were not even requested by either side. That was left alone. But the only reason I believe that Ghislaine even was arrested is because the case was supposed to die with Epstein, as far as the media and investigators like myself, investigators like you, and we didn't stop asking questions. We didn't stop talking about it. So then they decided they're going to take Ghislaine, and that will be the end of our inquiry. As you can see, you and I are still talking about it in 2023.
Yeah, it's true. Well, I think that there's a questions that probably many of the people who are listening this program is making right now, Kirby, and is which is the role of the CIA in these kind of lives, in lives like the life of Epstein, like the life of Ghislaine. Which is the role of the CIA?
The CIA, like Mossad, which I believe partnered in this operation, um, have run covert um, sexual compromise operations for a very long time. I'm going to reveal information right now with you that nobody has ever heard. Um, in the Franklin child abuse case, which was subsequently basically uh, covered up and described by the court as a hoax, putting even one of the child victims in jail. This happened in the 1960s. Two books have been written about it, and neither book mentions which CIA asset controlled the operation. I'm going to give you the name of this person. Perhaps nobody has heard of this name, but this person ran what was called the Brownstone operation, and his name is George Pender. George Pender is someone that would be above, let's say, Jeffrey Epstein, right? Sort of. So they need this. They have had this. The CIA, the Mossad. I would imagine that any a country with an intelligence agency would have an operation like this, and that George Pender really ran the that child abuse ring, which, by the way, the victims, some of them knew that the money generated by this ring funded the Iran Contra war. So that what has Epstein's operation funded? I think that's a fair question that no one has even thought to consider.
And well, we have talked at least a little about CIA, but which is the role of the Mossad, of the Israeli intelligence service, in these two lives?
It's clear that, Epstein, during the first time that he was arrested, he flew to Israel, and the Israeli newspapers wrote about the fact that he was in Israel. I think nobody really even noticed that he was not in the country. He went to Israel in May of 2008, at the end of May 2008. And I think it was his intention to stay in Israel because he would not have been extradited for sure. However, Israel has had a working relationship with the CIA. We have to remember that during Iran Contra, it was the Mossad who ran the arms trafficking, while the United States did the drug trafficking. They did it as a joint operation. So that Mossad, I mean, we've had instances where, some of their spies are caught, but not really. In this instance, they were really partners. I can't say it was more Mossad than CIA. I think it was a joint operation.
Um, I'm going to talk about a different issue, and I want that you explain to us if this is a kind of urban legend of a figment of imagination of or there is any kind of truth. Is any piece of truth in the relationship between this world we are talking about and the worship of Satan?
Well, that's yes. I mean, so I'm going to explain that in a way that hopefully
Please, please.
your audience can appreciate. I'm looking for my notes here because I want to make sure to share everything with you. Um, we also have to remember that before Epstein was, let's call it suicided, right? There was another attempt on his life about 2 weeks before. Um, and nobody really even bothers to talk about that. However, let me just find the Satan information because that's an important aspect that, again, is not really discussed. So, like, his house, for example, had, when you walk in, and I have not been to his house, but I know people who have lived there, right? He had prosthetic eyeballs in the entrance of his home. That's a very he had a lot of satanic symbols in all of his homes. We all know about Jimmy Savile of the UK. He carried an eyeball on a chain, right? The eyeball formerly belonged to one of the victims. Clearly, Epstein had a temple on his island that was very mysterious and had a lot of symbolic um, imagery that belonged to the satanic world. I have a photo that was given to me by one of the victims of a robed figure. So if you can imagine Stanley Kubrick's movie Eyes Wide Shut with
Yeah, I
yeah,
remember it. Yeah.
yeah. So he had a figure like that uh, on the island, and she sent me a photograph of that. However, I think what can best describe this, do you remember those pictures that came out of Prince Andrew opening the door and Catherine Keating, the daughter of Australia's former Prime Minister Paul Keating, the girl with the dark hair, and Prince Andrew at the door of Epstein's Manhattan mansion? Do you remember those pictures?
I remember.
Okay, that girl is the daughter of the former Minister of Australia, Paul Keating. Paul Keating was a child abuser Satanist. Fiona Bartlett is a victim of Paul Keating, and her abuse in the satanic world began when she was 5 years old. And it was a very well coordinated international pedophile ring. She claimed to have witnessed child abduction, rape, torture, even murder, and stated there were thousands of other child victims. She named Paul Keating. So you have Paul Keating, who has been named in what we think is a different ring, right? But they're all interconnected and they all traveled back into the, let's say, the land of the CIA, right? So we have the daughter of Paul Keating being very close with Jeffrey Epstein. I think if you follow that thread, it shows you what we have not been able to see, right? The satanic aspect. I have had a witness share with me there was a satanic ritual at Wexner's house, but I can't verify that because clearly I was not there.
I see. And well, do you think that really these persons believe in Satan? Of this is only an excuse to abuse children, for example?
There are two trains of thought, and that's a very, very good question. The first train of thought is that it is a psychological operation, right? That it is used, it was actually created by the CIA. It was used by Michael Aquino, who ran the Church of Satan. It's used as a
The temple of Set, Michael
exact,
Aquino, yeah, and the
yes,
Church of Satan was Anton LaVeyne.
exactly. So then there are people who become believers and they supply money and they supply themselves and they do things like this and then they commit other crimes because the crimes of Epstein, mainstream keeps it to only his own personal satisfaction, let's say, or maybe lending out Virginia to Prince Andrew. So is it really a psychological operation or do these people really believe it? I'm of the opinion that they believe that the sacrifice of either a child or someone of age, because not every victim is a minor, gives them strength. This is my belief that it gives them the ability to do superhuman things. Drugs are always used, on the victims. They become addicted and it makes it difficult for them to leave. Most of them are clearly murdered. And if you talk too much, you are targeted to be disposed of.
Now, Kirby, we had been talking about Jeffrey Epstein, about Ghislaine, Maxwell, about the CIA, the Mossad. Well, I think there's a question boiling within my heart that is very important. Are democracies really free, or are under the direction of the intelligence community?
Yeah, I used to believe, being born in the United States, that I lived in a democracy. And then I realized that we're censored. Yeah, I didn't realize the extent of the censorship, let's say, in the media, until I really learned about the Church Committee hearings of 1975, where Sig Mickelson, that's Migleson, he was in 1954 the head of CBS, was questioned by Frank Church, who led the committee. And
Yeah,
he basically said, "Oh, we've had by the time I became the head of CBS, we had a long-standing relationship with the CIA to only tell the public what they wanted us to say to them." And then from there, I realized that, like we had in 1954 with the United States overthrowing of the Guatemalan elected president
yeah.
Jacobo Arbenz. Remember that?
Yeah, I remember
Well, that
Jacob Arbenz. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So then, but why did they did it? They did it for United Fruit Company. What's interesting about this, says is really important because years later, the father of Leon Black, who is one of the two people who provided money to Jeffrey Epstein, Eli Black, was the president, the CEO of United Fruit Company, which is very tangled. Again, you have to
yeah.
look at the connections, tangled with the CIA. And then what happens in 1975? He is suicided by falling out of the 44th floor of the Pan Am building. So all of these, basically, can you see the pattern? It's like a circle within a circle, generation after generation.
I see. Well, I think that we must go back to Jeffrey Epstein. Well, really, Kirby, his end was a suicide or he was murdered.
Well, I have a really interesting thing to add that, again, I do not believe anybody is aware of. A lot of people say, oh, I think Jeffrey Epstein is still alive. I never really believed that because I thought he presented too much of a problem already. He was already too exposed. But I have a former CIA, very, actually, a pretty good source that I trust, who told me that the jail made arrangements with an intelligence operative to allow this operative into the jail, which is why, quote, none of the cameras were working, the guards were asleep, all of these abnormal things that should have never happened. And suddenly Epstein is dead of suicide. Sure, I was told that he was murdered by the intelligence community. They let in the assassin.
And why do you think he was murdered? They wanted to shut up the mouth of Epstein.
Yeah, because Epstein was very self-serving, and there was no telling. I think that Epstein, my information based on, let's say, sources, Epstein was in France before he was arrested in the US. People think that he didn't know he was going to be arrested. He knew, but I think he believed that it would be as easy as the first time. So he came back and he was arrested. And then he realized he was not given the opportunity to post bail, that this time it was going to be different. And so I think it was just at that point he needed to be gone. There were just too many people. And also, it's important to note that the person who almost killed him the first time is a man by the name of Nicholas Tartaglione. He is a former police officer for Westchester County. And why is Nicholas Tartaglione important? He's important because, well, number one, this man is giant. I don't know if you remember his picture. He's like a
I
350,
remember it. I remember it.
350 pounds, all muscle. Maybe he's 6'4". I don't know. He looks like a giant to me. He because when you're a police officer in a county like Westchester, you take on overtime assignments. Well, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton live in Westchester. I am sure he worked for them on overtime. And who else has property? Donald Trump has a golf course in Westchester. So you have somebody who has these connections to perhaps two of the most powerful men that Epstein exposed in the United States. So I always found it peculiar that it was this man, Nicholas Tartaglione, that Jeffrey Epstein said he tried to kill me. But then it disappeared. And then 2 weeks later, he's dead. And it's supposed to be suicide, and we're supposed to believe that.
Well, people who are listening this interview, I'm totally sure that you are fascinated by the words of Kirby Sommers. I must tell you that her books are incredible books. You can find, for example, in Amazon.com, this Jeffrey Epstein Predator Spy. You can find the Ghislaine Maxwell, an unauthorized biography, and different books by her. I must tell you that they are very, very good books. These are a very good reading, believe me. And I must ask you right now, which work are you dealing with right now?
What I do is I try to pull information on each one of the people involved to see what their role may have been. And of course, I'm working on the sequel to my memoir, The Billionaire's Woman. I would like to have that finished and out. I try not to put a lot on Amazon, and I try to stay away from publishers. Traditional publishers are afraid of the information, and
Yeah.
smaller publishers, it's a little dicey because I don't know if I can trust many people. So most of my books are on my website, kirbysommers.com, and there are maybe 5 or 6 that are on Amazon. And where I'm going to put the sequel to The Billionaire's Woman, I'm not sure yet.
And last question. I'm totally. I know that I'm taking a lot of time from you, but really, this is an interview very interesting. Let me confess this. But which book you haven't written and you would like to write in the future?
I think the one that I would like to write is perhaps would be based on a lot of the questions that you and I have discussed. Things that people are not aware of, names people are not aware of, the roles that different organizations play. I would like to write that, the unknown story.
I see. Well, Kirby, I'm very very thankful for this time that you have given us. In other times in the past, when these interviews were made in a radio set, I was used to give to the persons who were so kind and so patient and so nice, like you, one of my books signed by me. I always said, well, you are not obligated to read it. It's only a small gift, a little present, but this is not possible right now. And I leave the people with a song, with a piece of music, and I have chosen for you a song of Marta Sanchez. She's a Spanish singer that is entitled Dime la verdad, tell me the truth, and is a song speaking about there's a hidden truth and I should like to know it, so that please tell me the truth that is not the truth given by media, by TV, by the politicians. I think that Kirby Sommers is doing a very, very incredible work of giving, of showing, of transferring the truth to the people. And he's in areas where normally current people doesn't want to put their feet, but you are doing. And I think we must be very thankful for you, because this is not only a very literary banquet. This is also a real social work, and you are doing in a very exceptional way. So that, Kirby, well, thank you very much, and I hope that we're going to meet together again in the future.
That would
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for letting me sit here and explain this to you in the way that I have found it. Thank you so much.
El programa La Voz es una producción de Artorias Incorporated y, al amparo del derecho a la libertad de expresión, no se hace responsable de las opiniones vertidas en el curso del mismo.